All right, are you guys ready? Okay, my name's Amber. I actually know most of you, but they're gonna be in your neck. Okay, but I'm really nervous, so bear with me. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. We're gonna talk today about being a buddy, and I'm looking at you guys, and I think most of you guys are probably really well versed in this. And that's great. If you have something to add, I missed, please add it in. If you have questions, please stop. I'd like to have a discussion that doesn't just have to be me talking. So feel free to jump in if I've missed anything. So the first thing is, why is this important? There's a lot of reasons why it's important, and I think each of us probably has our thoughts on this, but I was looking at some statistics. So that speaks to me if we look at the whole picture. In one study, more than half of parents with a child with a disability reported their child had been excluded at church. I mean, that hurts. Almost a third, or 32% of special needs families said they left at least one church because their child was not included or welcomed. Nearly 50% of parents with a child with special needs said they refrained from participating in a religious activity because their child was not included or welcomed. People with autism are more likely to be atheists and more likely to reject organized religion. And fatigue was a common parental characteristic cited as preventing inclusion of a child at church. Many parents actually indicated a strong desire for church community, but as one put it, because of our child's needs, we have not had the time or the energy to seek out and prepare or educate a new spiritual home for ourselves. Therefore, we do not attend regular weekly services anywhere as much as we could really use the support in the spiritual community. That's harsh. That's really hard. And I know for my job, the parents of the children I work with, they're just desperate for community. They're desperate for a place to belong. And that's what they really want. They really want their children to be included. They know their child's not going to look like everybody else's child. They know their child needs more support. That's not a deterrent. It's when they go and there's no support. I even know people that have been asked to leave churches because of their children. And that to me is awful. So that's one of the reasons that's really important to me. Looking at these statistics, we can tell there's a really big need to include individuals with disabilities in our church. And the thing that's important to me that I need to remember is it's not just about that child, it's about the whole family. If we can support that child, the whole family will feel welcome. I found lots of people have talked to me about it. I've found across the board many families with a child or children with disabilities are isolated, they long for community, and they would love to participate in the church. But if their child with disabilities is not welcome, the whole family feels unwelcome. That's really my why. I care about the children I work with. I care about children I don't know that might come here. And I can't imagine my family as a family feeling unwelcome because one of my children is unwelcome. So that's why I choose, why it's important to me. Does anybody else know why it's important to you? Would you have anything to say about that? You open your mouth.
I was just breathing.
Okay, you're allowed to breathe. You're allowed to breathe. But if anybody has a why, and think about that as we go through this, because it's not easy. Working with kids with disabilities is really difficult sometimes. Last week was hard for me, and that's okay. I mean, it's 50 minutes of hard, or 45 minutes of hard, but if you think about it from the perspective of a family, that's their break. Like, I can do hard for 50 minutes so they can come to church and they have to go back, and that's their whole life. Like, it might be hard for us briefly, but there's no end. Like, there's not going to be an end in sight for them. And that's really important, I think, to keep in mind. So I have a lot of whys, but those are just a few of mine.
I can say I'm a pediatrician, so it is important for families. And I also have a nephew who's autistic. I have a nephew who has ADHD.
Yeah.
So for both those families to be involved has been huge, especially for my nephew and his member.
Yeah. Do they feel welcomed?
I think they do. They're both church and is now the youth minister at our church. So, and it has been very much involved.
Yeah,
sure that.
That's good. That's great. Anybody else want to share before I move on? Okay, mission that I got from something Curtis created. The mission is to provide helpful, effective, and practical training to our buddies so that they can effectively assist our students with special needs and truly being involved and belonging to our ministry. Seems like a good mission to me. I think that sums it all up perfectly. So that's really what we're trying to do today. So these are all generalities. We're just going to talk about students we have here. These are generalities. And I was thinking about this as I was writing it up. And what I think happens is when you are good at something, more people come. So I don't think if we happen to be really good at this in 3 or 4 years, it won't look like this. It'll look different. We'll have a lot of different children with a lot of different disabilities, and that's actually great. That would be the purpose of it. No two individuals are alike. Just like we are, no two individuals with autism, no two individuals with ADHD, no two individuals with CP are alike. They're all different, so these are just generalities. The first one is autism, and the statistics I got, or the information I got, was this is the most common disability we have currently at our church. We have a lot of people with autism. I was surprised to see that. And there's a lot of differences. They can range in communication from no words at all, completely nonverbal, to really no problems with communicating, or problems maybe communicating under certain circumstances. I work with children at school who have a communication device, and that's really fun. We don't have any of those children, but hopefully we will sometime, and that would be something you would need specialized training on because they're really hard. I need specialized training from a speech pathologist because they're hard. Sensory differences, these students seek out or avoid sensory differences. There's a lot of different sensory issues happening, and the sensory issues fluctuate from day to day. One day they may be sensory seeking, one day they may be sensory avoiding. It can fluctuate from moment to moment. It's a really good idea if you are working with a child with autism to observe their sensory preferences and then ask the family. It may be an off day that they're really avoiding things. Maybe normally they're really trying to be what we might consider wild by jumping and climbing and running. But that's really their brain and how their brain works and how they are seeking out different experiences. They may be avoiding loud noises. They may need headphones. And along the lines of sensory preferences, church has a lot of sensory things going on. So I've been in the youth group class. That's rough for me. I'm fairly typical. It's loud. It's it's really crowded. The lights go on, the lights go off unexpectedly. Kids crunching, they jump around. I was sitting in the back Wednesday night, and there were kids like swaying and dancing, and that's great. Like that's wonderful. But if you happen to be sensory avoidant, that's rough. Like that's a rough place. In our Journeyland and our younger kids, like kids have no boundaries. They're all over the place. It's loud. The child I'm with messes with the lights all the time. So if you don't like visual stimuli, then it's dark and light. So there's a lot going on in all these classes. There's a lot going on in our main worship and the auditorium. There's a lot going on in the hall. So we have to be aware that all those things can be really difficult for kids who have sensory differences. A lot of times children with autism are very rigid or they have difficulty with transitions. Giving them some notice might help. And I'm going to talk about some actual tools in a little while. But just notice if your child is rigid or if they struggle with transitions. There's ways to work with that. And the other thing is sometimes it's hard to transition from something you really love to something you hate. I actually don't like to do that. I'd rather do the things I love. So if they have a Lego center or a building center, and then they're going to have to go sit and listen to a story, that's hard. That's hard for most of our kids. But it's going to be really hard for the kid with autism. And then cognitive differences. There's a huge range. We can have children with very low cognition all the way up to geniuses. We have that generally anyway, but our kids with autism have a wide range. And then it's really interesting because some of them might have specific cognitive deficits, like they may really struggle with reading, they may struggle with math or processing language, but they may have some skill that's really amazing. They may be talented with music. They may be one of those kids that knows the day on the calendar. I had a kid at Deer Creek that I could say June 3rd, 1976, and he could say Wednesday. You know, that's right, but he could tell you any day of the week. I don't. It's kind of a specific skill that's not translatable to the real world, but it was really cool. So they might have those skills. The one thing I do know is if they have a special skill like that and they don't enjoy being quizzed on it, don't do that. It's not a party trick. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. So anyway, like I said, every child is unique and different, but that's kind of some characteristics of autism. Have I missed anything? Anything I missed? Down syndrome, we also have at least one child with Down syndrome. They're very recognizable. They have physical characteristics that are very recognizable. Their face looks different. They're usually small. Their hands and feet are small. A lot of times they have poor eyesight and poor hearing. Not always, but a lot of times. They also have some medical characteristics. A lot of them have had problems with their hearts, and there's some spinal differences that are important to know about if they happen to have it. But anyway, they're very different physically. You can recognize them. They have cognitive differences. Usually their IQ is a little bit lower. They're definitely hard to understand based on their oral structure. They're hard to understand. And I have a hard time understanding my students with Down syndrome, but I usually just look at their faces and ask them to repeat themselves. I make a joke about me, like, Miss Amber is really bad at understanding sometimes. Can you please repeat that? They think that's hilarious. And then they do struggle to process sometimes if you give them too many things at once, or there's too much going on. I notice a lot of times they get Special Olympics, my students with Down syndrome tend to shut down. It's overwhelming. It's chaotic. There's a lot going on. It might be loud. So that, I think church is probably a really hard place for some children with Down syndrome, just because there's a lot going on and a lot expected. What I do want to impress upon you with children with Down syndrome, especially as they age into the teenage years, yes, they might be interested in Sesame Street. They might be interested in things that are younger than them, but they also know what is appropriate for their age, and they don't necessarily want to talk about that all the time. Talk to them about things you would talk to a normal teenager about. If they don't want to talk about it, they'll tell you. But I tend to treat them like a typical teenager, and that's what they want to do, especially as they're around more teenagers. They want to talk about boys, or they want to talk about their hobbies. They want to talk about a sport they might do. They want to be treated just like everybody else. They're very aware of how everybody else is treated. And they also really want to be friends with the other kids. So if you can help them be included in the group, that's really good. Any questions about Down syndrome? So here is some things about being a buddy. We all probably know this, but I thought it was important. So our whole goal is to provide one-on-one support during church activities. Ideally, we would be the same child repeatedly. It wouldn't be like one time this person's a buddy, one time this person's a buddy. We want a relationship over time. We want understanding, social familiarity, and then consistency. All those things help a child with a disability be included. So here's just some things that I would recommend. Arrive early. I'm terrible at this. Sorry, Jill. I'm gonna go ahead and say I'm bad at that. I'm usually running in after my friend. Be prepared. Have the things your child would need, sensory tools, candy, timers. So Renee is not here, but when I tried to sub for her, she is really prepared. She has visuals, she has a routine down, she has everything the child would need in a bag. It's ready to go. It was really awesome. It would have worked perfectly with it. The student actually hated me, so which is fine. Well, I think we didn't prepare him properly. Well, he has not forgotten about me. He sees me and he yells, no. Which, don't take that personally. It happens to everybody. It's okay. So arrive early, be prepared, greet your student upon arrival, engage with them. Don't just drag them from thing to thing or sit by them, engage with them. Gently assist in preparation or participation. Don't force, don't do hand over hand, don't threaten, all that. We'll get to that in a little while. Don't do the activity for the child. That's one thing I notice, not here, but in my job at school, people want the kid to have something to take home. I do. I want them to have the paper. I want them to show that they're participating. But if they're not going to do it, me doing it and telling the mom, they did this paper, that's really silly. The mom knows. I mean, the parents know. If I can get the little friend to scribble a little bit or make a handprint or do something, that's a success with the student I'm working with. There's no reason to make the child do something they don't want to do if it's just to give it to the mom. I think there's some benefits in having them sit and participate, but I'm not going to force them to do something that they're absolutely resistant to. But like I said, do assist when needed, don't do it And then don't leave before pickup. That really throws the kid off. If they've had this friend with them the whole time, you're like, see ya, at the end when it's chaotic, that's probably not gonna work out very well. And then I actually did my presentation for my 14-year-old last night, and she gave me this one. For our older students, the teenage years, give them space, don't hover. She said that she feels like if you're there to give them support, but then let them interact with their peers, that's great. They don't need you all the time, and you'll get a sense of that, whether they need you all the time. But she was kind of referring to some of her friends in her grade. She said, he just needs somebody kind of to help him jump in. She doesn't need somebody sitting right with him. And I thought that was really good because I was thinking of it more from what I'm doing with the younger kid. But with our teens, you're right, most of them don't. Sometimes they might be feeling more anxious. They might be having a hard time. If you sense that, of course, give them what they need. But if they don't need you, give them space. Most teenagers want space. Our children with disabilities aren't really any different. So now we're going to move on to, does anybody have any questions about your role? Specific? Okay. So connecting with your student, it takes time. It's not going to happen the first time you meet them. You're not going to just automatically be best friends. You need to get to know them, look at it as building a relationship, know what they like and what they don't like. And then my 8th grader again gave me some really good thoughts. She said, get to know everybody around them. Like if you're with a student and they have a group of kids that they're always with, get to know those kids too. Be a buddy to all of them. That lets the child with a disability feel less targeted, I guess, or less focused on. And it also kind of helps you maybe know how to incorporate them. If everybody's into one thing and your student is into something else, say, hey, you want to look into this? Or maybe let the parents know. You want to look into this? All the kids in his group are really into Pokemon and he seems to hate it. Maybe we could show him more about it. It's probably the opposite. The child's probably really into Pokemon and everybody else hates it. But that's my example. Once again, being consistent. And then I always put connection over compliance. That's kind of what I was talking about with the paper. There's probably a reason our students don't want to participate in an activity. We might not know that reason. The child might not know that reason. There's just might be a reason that they might not want to do it. And never ever force a kid to do something. We need kids like to get on a bus. We need kids to go to this room. But physically forcing them you're gonna break their trust. It's hard because of course, I'm a parent and I picked up my toddler and left holes and everywhere many times. But these students at church are not our own children. They're not gonna trust us like our own children trust us. It's gonna take a long time to build trust. And then if you break it, you might not ever give it back or it'll take a long time. The other problem with force is it puts you in an authoritarian role. That's not the way to build a relationship. I mean, our ultimate goal here is to let the child feel included and hopefully someday come to know Jesus. If you're forcing a kid in the door to learn, everything's out the window. I mean, I just don't think it's worthwhile at church. And there's not a reason to, like, if a child won't go into the room one time, okay, sit out and connect with them in the lobby. Make it a time to get to know them. That's much more worthwhile in the long run than forcing them in. They're not going to miss, whatever they miss in there is not life-changing probably one time. Over the course of a year it would be, but you know, if there's a problem and they're not going in consistently, we can work on that. And I'm going to get to that in a little while. Anybody have any thoughts about that? People that do this, like you guys, Stephanie, any thoughts?
I would just say too, like, I know with getting to know your students, sometimes I feel like as a being a buddy, that might feel a little overwhelming, but you try to give you a little survey sheet that the parents have filled out to tell you some of the likes and dislikes, some of the wording that the parent uses, that kind of thing. So we do try. to
That's
help
very
you with it.
helpful.
Yes.
Yes, I forgot about that. That's really helpful. I need to do a better job looking at mine again. But it's that.
But it also changes.
It does.
Yes.
It does. Yeah, it does. That's okay.
Yes.
All right. So here's some of the tools you all might be familiar. We all know about skills. Candy. So the first thing is a visual. This is just one example of a visual. The first thing, this probably isn't going to work with our teenagers. They're maybe occasionally, but most teenagers are past this and they'll probably throw it at you. But there's a lot of different visuals, and like I talked about Renee with her students, she has great visuals. There's a visual schedule which you can add to, you're usually Velcro, and you can put like first the paper, then outside, whatever, you know, the order of it, and that's very, very helpful. This is a visual timer. I actually use one like this with my students, and it's on my phone. There's a lot of different ones, but on my phone is great because I keep it with me. And what I like to do with the student with a visual timer is show them, we're gonna stand in the hallway for 2 minutes, you start it, they start it, and then I say, when it goes off, we're going in, and then mine has a beep, which I like, with about 10 seconds left, and then when it goes off, I have the student turn it off. They don't turn it off, we stand there for a really long time. And then they typically will go with a lot of reminders and say, remember, the time's up. If you just structure it that way, it probably will work, but sometimes it's a work in process. But anyway, visual timers are great. Sensory tools, we'll get to. Candy can be a motivator. If you're using candy for a motivator, give them one at a time. And you can only use it for once or twice in class period. It's not gonna work over time. I mean, maybe they're really hungry, but generally it's just gonna work once or twice. So give them one candy at a time. The break, take a break. That's always helpful. Sensory tools are really helpful. This is just a few of them. Headphones, or students who are averse to noise. Fidgets. There's a problem with monkey noodles flying across the room. Stacy's aware of that problem. So I've been cutting them really small so that they don't go very far. Kids all have their sensory preferences. They change. Fidgets are really big right now with our younger kids. So if they have a fidget, they don't look so different. But these are just some sensory tools. And then there's something I call the new face technique. Stacy knows about it. But there's something about if you're really in the kind of like a standoff with a child, there's something about just somebody else coming along and offering, hey, you want to come with me? Or hey, let's do this, because I think they just get bored of us or tired of us, or they can tell sometimes as adults we get kind of frustrated or obstinate, and we're mad. It's difficult for us, and they can sense that, and it's fun. Like, oh, I'm gonna dig my heels in because this is way more fun than the Bible story. So just a different face coming along and inviting them, even if you're not inviting them to go into class, like, you want to walk with me, you can text somebody and say, can you come help me? Can you come offer to take them for a walk? That's a really great thing, and it's really good for us as adults. We all need breaks too. We should be able to make it through a class period, but if you're on like a youth group activity or a longer event, you especially might need a break. So I think that the new face technique is a pretty good way to do that. Things aren't going to work all the time. It's going to be a challenge some of the time. So if things are not working, assess the problem. Is it a little problem? It's a little problem, let it go. Little problems to me are maybe they don't want to sit the whole time. Maybe they hate the coloring page. They don't want color. In the youth group, they can only make it for 10 minutes. Hey, let's be happy they made it for 10 minutes. They're yelling out silly things. That's okay for a little bit. Might become a big problem over time. If it is a big problem, then look, here's some things to do. You have to assess the situation, and then look, does somebody need a break? It could be you that needs the break. It could be the child that needs the break. It could be everybody else around the child. Somebody might need a break. Unmet physical needs are really a big key, and you might not know what those are. We're not going to know that, but especially our children that have a hard time either verbalizing what's going on with them, or maybe with sensory processing difficulties. They're hungry, they're thirsty, they need to go to the bathroom, they're overstimulated sensory-wise, they're exhausted. All that can really play into behavior. It's hard to know, but sometimes when you don't know, try that. Let's get a drink, let's have a snack, let's take a walk, let's go to the bathroom. You can try some of those things. Sensory issues are really challenging. Hopefully over time you'll get to know if your kid is on the verge of a sensory problem. They might show some typical signs. I mean, of course, covering their ears, running, jumping. You may also know that your kid can only sit for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes. That's okay. Just be aware of that and start taking a break and plan, like, what's the most important time of this class? Oh, let's come in for the middle 10 minutes. So plan around that. But even sometimes with sensory issues like being too hot or being too cold, those can really play into how a kid interacts with others. And it's hard for us to know that. So you kind of have to be a little bit of a detective sometimes. The unexpected things really throw some of our friends for a loop. So look for the unexpected. Is class always set up this way and today there's a guest speaker and it's out the window? That'll really cause problems. Maybe if it's gonna be that way, give your student a warning before you go in. Is there another kid who's really difficult that's not usually there? Or is there a loud child, or is the teacher different? All those things can cause a student with disabilities to kind of struggle or not behave normally. There also could be things going on at home we don't know about. I think that's always a possibility. We're not gonna know that unless the parents tell us. So maybe we just have to assume some of the time it's not us, it's not church, it's something else. Just do our best. The other thing is look at what's expected and then look at what the child's able to do. Unfair or unattainable expectations cause a lot of stress in children with disabilities. They actually cause a lot of stress in every child. They cause a lot of stress in me. If I go to work and I'm expected to do things that my ability is just not able to do, that's pretty stressful. Imagine that throughout your day. Imagine everything you do has unattainable expectations. Now imagine it's the weekend and your parents drag you somewhere else where there's unattainable expectations. You're gonna be over it. That's not gonna be ideal. So especially with our children, maybe this time of school year with schools crazy, look at what's expected of them and what they're really capable of. If we need to change the expectation for that child, I think that's great. I mean, does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Any questions about when things don't work? Okay, so I'm gonna go back to this. Maybe you've broken their trust and that's why things don't work, but here's some things that will definitely break your child's trust. Lying, I think that should be given. Coercion, that's harder to detect because as a parent, I think sometimes we walk that line pretty closely, but be aware that it's not your child. You don't have the trust to start with, so be really aware of that. Threats, if you don't go in this room, I'm going to call your mom. I mean, that's not helpful. What are we showing the kid by that? Like, we just want them to do what they want to do. Encouragement's great, but threats, and then I just would caution about ever using physical force. It's hard with our little ones. Sometimes we want to just pick them up, and I think sometimes if you do need to pick them up, if they're laying on the ground, say, "Can I pick you up?" Ask. If they say yes, then that's not physical force. That's helping. But we never want to use physical force with these kids. Church should really be a safe place. It should be a safe place for all our kids. And if another child sees you picking up or dragging the kid, it becomes a not safe place for them as well. I don't want my own children to feel like church is a place they're going to get dragged around or hauled off. I certainly don't want a child with disabilities feeling that way. It's hard because we really want kids to participate. And sometimes I think when that's where connecting with a child and understanding the purpose of just being there to help them participate, not force them to participate. We're there to help and we're there to support them, not necessarily do it for them or force them to participate. Have any thoughts about that? It seems, I will say this seems like a no-brainer right now when we're sitting in a room. But I will say last week when the student I was with would not go in the room the whole time, ever. I did think about picking him up. I was like, I could just pick this kid up, but I didn't. I wanted to, but I didn't. So in the moment, sometimes it's not as easy as cut and dry. So be aware that people, I mean, I do this at work all day long, and I don't pick kids up at work either, but I want to. So it's hard, but it is possible to do it. Just remember, short amount of time, you can get through this. If they stay in the hall the whole time, it's okay. There's worse things that could happen, much worse things. And if you look at it on the big picture, like, okay, this child's at church, in the hall laying under a water fountain. Well, it could be worse. They could be watching cartoons. We'll take it. Like, that's actually what the child I was with was doing. He was in the hall under the water fountain, which I think was a sensory thing because it was warm and quiet, and he was just having a moment for an hour. So when do you ask for help? If you've gone through a big problem versus a little problem and you've tried everything and this is an ongoing problem with your child, here's when you ask for help. First off, safety. We always want kids to be safe at church. I want you all to be safe too. If there's a situation where a child is aggressive, that's a big deal. We don't want the other kids to feel unsafe. We want everybody to recognize our church is safe, comforting, warm place where they're loved. If there's a safety issue, that's a big deal. As a buddy, if you're feeling overwhelmed, burned out, exhausted, if you don't feel like you're at your best consistently, that's when you ask for help too. You might just need a break. We all kind of need breaks sometimes. If you've run out of ideas, like if it's not going well and you've done these things, you've done everything you can, ask for help. You can ask staff members, you can ask people who work with children, you can ask me, you can ask a lot of people. We actually have a lot of people in our church who work with kids with disabilities. And if I don't know, they might know, or if they don't know, we'll get together and we'll form a little problem-solving committee. If you notice over time the child is responding less and less, or the child doesn't want to participate, or the family mentions that the child dreads church, we probably need to make a change. It might not be anything at all that you as the buddy are doing. It might not be anything at all other than the child is going through some changes, but we don't want them to not want to come to church. Ultimately, we want them to be there. So these are when you would ask for help. I think there might be some other situations. These are just the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Can anybody add to that? Anybody that's done this for a while? Okay. So that's mostly, I was gonna highlight some areas of what was going on, but there's such a difference between a teenage child and our Journeyland and then our preschool. There's such a difference. I couldn't really think how to like mush it all together. So depending on your age of your child, I think then we could look at what it would look like for you. But there are opportunities for junior high and senior high overnights and camps and things like that. I think if you're gonna go on a camp with them, that would be a situation where you would want to have backups. You'd want to have a plan in place. And for our little ones, if they do have to, I don't know if they go to Inside Out camp or anything, but they do. So that's a whole nother situation, and it's really hard. But depending on the setting and what's expected, I think anybody would be willing to problem solve. Does anybody have questions or thoughts? No?
I just think one good thing is to keep a communication with the family. Text with them, exchange phone numbers with them, keep in contact with them, what's going on.
That's hard though. I mean,
It is, it's a big commitment too. Yeah.
well, I think it's hard too because,
You don't.
well, for me, like I want to communicate with the parent when they come to pick up and they clearly are like, let's go. So then you don't, I mean, I find that hard. I don't know the best way to do that. So that's good advice.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to
I
exchange.
think
phone
if you
numbers.
stay positive too with them.
Yes.
And they start hearing all the positives, then they might want
Yeah.
to talk more too, because they hear the negative a lot. So if they hear more positives, then that helps.
And it's easier from a minister's, I mean, like, for us to communicate and then communicate, it's easier if the buddy just communicates
Yes.
with the family. That's the thing that's been a big part for us too, is to keep that communication open.
So is it appropriate to ask, say, hey, I'm gonna be the buddy for another quarter. Here's my number.
I think so.
So can I have you? Like, do we
Yes.
ask them for their number or do we just throw it out there?
Yeah, I think you can offer it and they'll give you yours if they're comfortable, or you can ask, I think. Because a lot of times they'll text us to tell us they're not gonna be there, they.
Right.
That way they can just communicate directly with you, we're out of town this weekend.
I wasn't sure if that was appropriate to do. The other thing that I asked I think Jill about is, my student especially, I felt like the other people in the class had unfair expectations. So I asked if it was okay to say, this kid has autism. Please don't expect him to do the center for 20 minutes. And she said, yes. That actually helped a lot. I don't know what they thought I was doing in there, but explaining helped a lot. It's been much better since I told them, like, I'm this buddy, he has autism, he's not gonna do that. Please don't force him. I had to feel like an advocate for my little buddy.
I guess it's like what Stacy was saying, what I would try to do with my buddy, and he was 3, so, that might be different than a high schooler, but I would say, oh, well, he shared, or he said the prayer, like, I would always say a positive thing over a negative thing that happened, because I think that a lot of parents are like, maybe they're looking for that would just make them happy that their kid did something that would be positive for the other kids or for themselves. Over like, if I say, well, he had a meltdown in 4, you know, that's not helpful, it's not constructive, because I'm sure he does that at home. So like sharing at church is a big deal, like things that the typical kid would do, maybe wouldn't be as big of a deal as for a student with a disability, so it would be a bigger deal to share a positive.
The other thing
Yeah, Randy Ferrero.
I learned the hard way when I subbed for Grace, what do we do? There's a button that you can push for help. That's good to know because I lost her child. He was fast and I'm fast, like I'm a fast runner and I lost the kid and it's bad. So, we was found, he was found. It was very stressful. But explain to me again, a doorbell, what is it?
There's a bell or just a button up high enough where the kids can't reach it on every door frame in our preschool department. So if you do need backup, you can just push the bell and it tells us down at the desk, the room number, and somebody will come up.
Since there's no like intercom system, that's the best
Yeah.
way to-
Well, I yelled, I lost the doorbell.
Yeah, you did, yeah, that works too.
We heard you.
It was rough. That was a rough introduction. And I've lost kids in my real job, but usually I'm more familiar and I know where they're hiding.
Right.
I did lose a kid the other day and the principal came around the corner when I was frantically looking for him and she did not even help me, so it was a whole problem. But, so, you know, I've lost a lot of kids. It wasn't Stacy, it was actually a high school kid. So any questions or any other thoughts about that?
And we also have, some of you might not know, a sensory room
Oh, yeah.
for like elementary and preschool. So we have a room, so if it's just not working in the classroom, they can go there.
It's awesome.
Yeah. And they also have a live feed for service, so they actually can go in there during service time, but then we did it and I kind of hit me that I was like, oh, these families now are still back in a room by themselves. So one of our goals eventually is to have some buddies during service time too, so that the parents can stay in the auditorium and the child just comes to this sensory room during service. So.
It's awesome. And I could not even get my little friend to go there last week. Well, he wouldn't go anywhere.
No, we just went to the elementary.
If you started doing that, right, you probably wouldn't know where you're going. Getting him to start.
I know. I was like, what if I could just. He had spaghetti legs, because then, like, I asked him, yeah, and I picked up, but he just was like, I don't know. It was like the wet noodle. So I just kept him in the floor.
There is stuff in there for team, I mean, there's a weighted blanket and things, but there's also a ball pit and a trampoline and a lot of little kid things, but there is a couch and a weighted blanket and something that teens could do, sort of.
Well, I felt like I might need a sensory.
Yeah, it was good for me, yeah.
Yeah, I like a couch.
Special lighting.
Yeah, special lighting.
Yeah,
Calm.
No.
it's really cool.
Josh has been taking a nap in there, apparently.
I have seen a kid that was overstimulated, and just bonkers, and we got him, he walked way to the rib, but as soon as he got in the ball pit, it was like someone taking a bubble bath, it was just like, I mean, it was amazing to watch, just like how quickly that just for him. And then he proceeded, I had 2 different sizes of balls in the ball pit, and that was not okay. So all the littler balls had to leave.
Sorted. We did
Yeah,
sorting
you're
pack.
sorting.
That is one thing, not the sorting, but if you have a good connection with your child, if they feel safe, a lot of times they will tell you what they need. I have a little guy this week at school who's really having a hard time. And he came and he like fell on top of me and then he took my hands and he just kept pushing them on his ears and like shaking. And we did that for like 15 minutes. And then I tried to back away and did it some more. And I think he was really like, his ears were plugged up. But he had like this pure look of joy when I would do it. And then when I would take it away, he would be like, so if they're safe, if they feel safe and they feel like you love them, they'll tell you what they need. He can't talk a lick, he can't talk at all. And he really can't even stand. He's a big little, he knows him. He can't even stand up, so he like had to lean on me. But if they feel safe and loved, they will let you know what they need. And that's what they need. that's just what they need in the moment, and that's okay. Sometimes you need what you need. So, if you have a good connection, a lot of times your kid will communicate, but it doesn't come by like one Sunday, it takes a while.
I've never done this before, so I'm curious, like, how does this work? Like, is this a like, do you do it for quarters, and then is it pretty common for everyone, like, you do switch, or if it is working, you stay, or what? How does that work, I guess,
We asked you for a quarter,
okay,
so, and then from there, you get to your transition where you overlap for a little bit, and then the next person kind of moves on, or if it's working and you're really connected,
right,
you're hoping to want to stay.
okay.
So I took over for somebody this quarter and I really like it and I'm gonna keep doing it, but there's times I'm gonna be out of town. So I'm gonna ask her, I haven't reached out to her, but I'm gonna ask her to sub for me because she was doing good too. She just had a lot of things coming up and it's hard to do. So I think that's helpful if the kid can have just a couple of people.
Right, well, that makes sense too, like, but you're like, for this instance, because of the training and stuff, is there like a list of people like, oh, I know I'm gonna be gone, so we would help facilitate some, like a list of, okay,
I would hang out the list too, so you know you're gonna.
cool.
Amber saying to help transition the journey too, which is huge. I mean, just having the same person for that big of a transition is a big deal. So that.
Yes.
I
think about
Very
I've been
helpful.
rethinking that last week. What am I doing? No, it'll be fine.
Yeah, and it was Amber, like the 2 weeks before last week, she was like, I think we should do this. I was like, we just changed ourselves.
I was thinking that too, yeah. But I do think a lot of kids at school all last week were really out of sorts too. I think it's the end of the year, and I think allergies are a big problem. I notice anytime allergies are a problem for me, the kids I work with don't feel good, so it's Oklahoma, so a lot of the time, but that things that we bother us, they bother our kids too. Every time you bring Scott,
Yeah.
Scott's like the ultimate expert.
We also, and I don't know if Curtis agrees, but I think we underutilize our peers, a lot of different things in schools as well. And Curtis says he doesn't want to take away, sorry, doesn't want to take away from the typical student's experience either at times, but a lot of our kids are buddies and there's similar programs in schools, so we could.
Yeah, and we have opened that up to our students to be able to join in. So kind of waiting on them to arrive.
Well, along those lines, I mean, our two daughters are buddies together and Kate that gave me the thing about back off, she ultimately said that. She said, the 8th grader, like, we're all his friends. He doesn't necessarily need a buddy around all the time because we're actually friends with him and we can help him if he needs it. Which is really the best case scenario. And I know her and Riley, like, they really like the student a lot and they do think of them as a friend. So really, like, that's the ultimate inclusion model is your own peers want you to succeed and are willing to help you. So,
And I think starting that with the younger grades is huge.
yeah.
And just that inclusion piece and, you know, so when they get older, you know, it's a lot easier for them to.
Yeah, that's the joy of kids starting so young and growing up together. When you are recognize everybody's different, this kid's just different in this way, that's the best.
Well, just amazing thing that the typical child learns through that experience too.
Yeah, because the kids that do it at school, they get training at school. And they're good at generalizing. I mean, I know that our kids are, and my older junior, she's a buddy, or she's a service learner. So she has a lot of experience. A lot of our kids do.
We start on them, they're great, you know, and so they love it. So it's-
I'm not sure how this fits in there too, but when you talk about building a relationship piece, one of the things that helps with that is the frequency of the interaction, and church makes that really difficult. And so I think the buddy program, I don't know for sure, is set up to just be on Sundays, is that correct? Nothing on Wednesdays?
A lot of, well, in preschool, I'll just speak, a lot of them do not come on Wednesday, they're done. Because they're being in school all day, so they choose not to come on Wednesday. So that's been our experience. And I think that's an experience in junior women too, now junior high might be.
I think that,
We have, I mean, it's compared to the 7 or 8 that come Sunday mornings, we probably have 2 that come Wednesdays.
yeah, so I just tried to, when I first signed up to be a buddy with Curtis, there wasn't really a student, so I showed up to Wednesday nights, just to be visible to all kids, so when I did show up for this one student as a sub, they were like, who's this strange man? And so I did get called to sub on Sunday, and I've been each Wednesday for several months, I just showed up and spent, 2 or 3 minutes trying to talk to the student, so he knew who I was when I'd be called to sub. So that frequency of the interaction is just, even if it's 2 minutes on a Wednesday or a Sunday.
Well, and you also connected with another student who now asked for you every week.
Yeah.
Mainly because he gave money to students.
Yeah.
And she well, she was having a very hard time, and I was out in the hall with her, and I introduced her to my friend, Mr. Scott. And she goes, "Do you have any cash?" And I didn't, she wanted a drink, and so he gave her some money for a drink, and now she'll come and she said, "You don't have any cash, is Mr. Scott here?" But I think she really enjoyed meeting you, and it helps, because now more than one kid knows you when you're around, so. It's a good point.
I think it's great to introduce the families of these kids to other families, and that's a big need of those families too, is to have other people to interact with that know about their child, but still will treat them respectfully and do typical parent things with them, invite them to dinner, invite them over to their house.
Well, and I'm noticing in kindergarten, there's already kids that clearly gravitate towards my student and want to help him, and there's kids who are like, they don't know what's going on, but there's a lot of kids that really want to interact with them, and I tried to get those kids like, "Hey, will you come color? Will you come do this?" So you can already see the tendencies, and in young, I think some kids are just wired that way. We can encourage that and build on that. That's very helpful. He left, so we're done. I'm kidding. I appreciate y'all's interaction and help. I hope it was helpful. Or what I'm talking about. I hope it was helpful for you, and I'm always willing to answer questions. And literally, so many people are in here are experts, so reach out to all of them. Yes, Scott's an expert. Yes, you are.
Well, and that, I think that for us as being like the directors and ministers of this program, you just like, please, if we're not, we want suggestions. We're kind of, Stephanie has special ed, I'm just early childhood, so but it was just really on my heart. And so we are happy to hear suggestions, and even when we send out to the parents, is this like helpful? If it's not, we need feedback too. So.